I read Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is a reread for me. It is a literary book with kind of science fiction dystopian elements to it. It's set in an alternate history, so I guess that's kind of, in my mind, what makes it science fiction-y. And the idea of the alternate history is that it seems to me like after World War II, the funding and research of the academic world went towards biological studies instead of electronic or physics type studies. And this resulted in rapid advancements of like cloning technology, genetic engineering, and things like that, while the evolution of computers and technology and things like that slowed down to a kind of comparable degree to biological advancement in our own actual history. So that all of that stuff that I just said is like way in the background of this story, but all of that to say that like the story takes place in the 1990s, but there are no like personal computers and, you know, like compact disc technology, like laser technology and other advanced technologies in the 1990s like that. Instead, there are clones and genetic engineering and advanced virus technology and on like that, like really good surgical techniques and so on and so forth. And the reason for all of that is because just going to like, obviously I spoil every book that I talk about, but I'm just going to bring the premise of the book forward that is like buried deep late in the book, is the fact that all of the main characters in the book are people who were cloned for the express purpose of their organs being harvested for people who are like not clones. They call them just normal people. And those people get the benefit of these healthy organs that are donated to them, or I guess harvested by them, when they get things like, you know, like cancer or whatever, cirrhosis or whatever, heart failure. And so the main characters as clones exist as a resource for the rest of quote unquote normal society. And they are thought of and treated as subhuman in their society because of that. But all of that stuff is like hidden from us as readers. And we're just introduced to the main character, Kathy, when she is a very young girl in a kind of boarding school / orphanage situation at a place called Hailstrom. The book is what I think of as like a diegetic memoir. So it exists as a book in the world that Kathy inhabits, this alternate science fiction history setting. And she is chronicling her life, I think, for the benefit of other clones like her. She often kind of does these asides that are, you know, like audience address type things where she says, I don't know how it was at your place, or I don't know if they taught you this. And the you that she is addressing seems to be someone in her same situation of growing up as a clone in this, you know, regime of people who get harvested. And so Kathy is mainly focused on two other children at the Hailstrom Academy, where it's her best friend Ruth and their other friend Tommy. And Tommy is kind of like the runt of the litter, is how I think of him. Like he is picked on by everyone. Even Kathy like kind of looks down on him and gets frustrated with his inability to like suck it up and like fight back or learn how to be cool. He's just too sincere and vulnerable, and everyone picks on him for being like too wide open and too real, I think. That's kind of how I interpret Tommy anyway. And Ruth is kind of the opposite. Like she is very... She lies all the time. She's constantly manipulating everyone around her. She's finding the sources of power in other groups and then trying to mold that power or mold herself to fit into those power structures better. And so there's these two ways of being that Kathy is kind of the middle mean in between them, with Ruth on the one hand, who is kind of ruthless, if you will, and Tommy, who is just utterly sincere and guileless. And these, friends being together create all kinds of situations that reveal to us the society in which they live. And I think a lot of the experience of reading the book for the first time is trying to puzzle out what exactly is happening. Why are all of these kids orphans? Why does everything feel like it's set, sometime in the 1960s or something, when they say that it's the 1990s? What is going on in this world? And as you slowly get paid out more and more information, there's a kind of horrifying realization that these kids are being raised to be instrumentalized by their culture in a way that feels monstrous, and their education kind of feels pointless because the teachers at Hailstrom highly emphasize them learning all kinds of literature, learning about beauty, and really pushing them to develop artistic talents and abilities of self-expression, and saying that those things are very, very important for them to learn. And there's a way in which I think that whole thing sits in a conversation that was happening from the 1960s through into the 1990s, although I think it was kind of done with by the 1990s almost, in the English departments of academia in the kind of Anglosphere, where there was this idea of belletrism that had existed, long before the 1960s, that approached literature and poetry and that entire cultural treasure trove of ancient texts up to modern novels as being valuable for the sake of its own beauty, if you will. What made literature great was the way in which the sentences were constructed to be beautiful. A poem was worthy because of the feelings that it evoked, the images that it evoked in us as readers. And there was a heavy emphasis in academia about learning Latin and Greek so that you could read ancient texts like the Odyssey or the Aeneid in the original language and kind of appreciate the way that it was constructed, as a text, not just the content of the text, but the actual, the way that it rhymed or the specific word choices and things like that. And so that the point being that the emphasis was on beauty as a self-justifying aesthetic. And what changed in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s was an emphasis in academia that had to do with funding and was related to the Cold War between the capitalist republics like England, America, and the rest of Europe versus the USSR, China, and other communist countries. So you had the Russian formalists came out kind of on the side of belletrism and saying the form of a literary object contributes to its beauty, blah, blah, blah. And because they were Russian, the Americans and the British were like, look, this is a Soviet Marxist idea. It is dangerous. It will deconstruct capitalism, and our entire way of life will collapse under the rot of examining, texts in this way. Instead, English departments should be teaching functionalism. The only reason that you should learn how to read and write is so that you can fill out memos and financial documents with accurate information, so that you can write instruction manuals to refrigerators that are legible for regular people so they can repair their own machines and blah, 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 things like that. And so getting away from the idea that beauty for beauty's sake is worthy, and instead everything should be kind of functional and, sleek and short, ideas like that. And so this led to a questioning of, the canon, so to speak, of literature. And so things like Shakespeare, Chaucer, they're like, why are we studying these things that are hundreds of years old when there are, modern texts that we all like and think are really good, and that we have to interpret and agree upon, Shakespeare means this, and we all must agree on that. There must be a kind of canonical meaning and reading of the text in that way. And if you don't read it that way, then you're wrong. Let's throw all of that stuff out. And instead, we're going to, kind of loosey-goosey, whatever we like, we're going to read it. And whatever our take on it is going to be, our reading, and somebody else can read it a different way. And that reading is valid too. So it's a big shakeup that happens in the 60s, 70s, and 80s of entire, structure of English departments. Why am I talking about this as it relates to Never Let Me Go? Because I think that the teachers at Hailstrom, which we learn are different than the other places that the clones grow up at, the thing that makes them different is their emphasis on art and having the clones do art and learn about beauty and kind of like encouraging an aesthetic sensibility in their students. And the students like kind of get an appreciation for art as it is, but their appreciation is nuanced in ways that have to do with like, they have a market where they buy each other's, quote unquote, buy each other's artworks. So there's some people who make poetry, there's people who make drawings, there's other people who write stories, there's all kinds of art happening. And there's no like real limits put on like how you express yourself, but there are ways in which the students judge each other and be like, oh, her poems are really, really good. His drawings are really excellent. And so they buy the art from each other on marketplace days, and then they keep them as collections. And so there's a kind of free market element to the whole thing, where the aesthetics kind of find a value in the medium of the market. And then this is kind of like delimited by, there's a lady who is like the principal or the dean of the school that they call Madame, and she picks out the things that she feels are the best, and she takes them like without paying for them. But this is considered like a high honor if your stuff is selected. And it's mysterious to the students why it's being selected, but based on the things that she picks, this kind of like informs them, okay, that one was really good. So things that are kind of close to that are obviously quote unquote good. And then the things that are far away from it are quote unquote bad. And this kind of gives them an aesthetic sense. And then they express that sense in their market and their collections and whatnot. So it's interesting to me. Like I said, it's not just beauty for beauty's sake, the way that belletrism presented itself in the late 20th century, around this fight, if you will, in the academy around functionalism versus belletrism. It's nuanced by this market that they have, and it has a function for the students where it helps them to feel esteem for themselves. Like if your stuff is picked, you feel really proud, and everybody in the class is like awed by wow, your work keeps getting picked again and again. That's amazing. And so there's a social value to it. It is not merely for the sake of beauty, I guess is what I'm saying. It has like other functions, an economic function, a social function, that I think Ishiguro is kind of being honest about the nuances of the place of art in our lives, which I think a lot of the book is about that whole thing. And the utility of art is something that the kids are really, really obsessed with, honestly, for like their entire lives. Up until the end of the book, there's a question of, does the art kind of like, quote unquote, do something beyond the aesthetic pleasure of producing it or experiencing it, as an audience member? So either being the artist or the audience, is there something beyond that for which the art has utility? And I guess at the end of the story, the answer is no. But I think on a deeper level, Ishiguro or the novel is kind of claiming that to be human is to be an artist. That the most human thing that we can do is make art. And that the fact that it doesn't have a direct functional utility is part of what makes it art. There's all kinds of things that art can deliver to us that are expressed in the story. So the title of the story comes from a song that Kathy has on cassette tape, Never Let Me Go, that it becomes like a favorite song and object for her when she's a young woman. And she listens to it, and it's a very like kind of melancholy, sad song about a pair of lovers, and they are holding each other in the night. And it, says like, never let me go, baby, 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 never let me go, is the lyric. And she doesn't interpret it as being about lovers necessarily, but being about a baby and about holding a baby. And the bond between, a mother and child is kind of how she interprets it. And she cradles a pillow and kind of rocks back and forth when she listens to it, because the clones are designed in a way that they are not going to be able to reproduce themselves. They have to be kind of produced, quote unquote, by some other industrialized means. And so when the teachers find her doing this, it's like really upsetting to them, because they feel like she is upset about her inability to ever be a mother, or maybe she doesn't understand the way in which she will never have a baby. And perhaps, like unconsciously, she is comforting herself with the song in that way. But I think the larger point is that the song itself is comforting to her. And like, this is one of the things that art delivers to us, is that it can express for us what we find inexpressible in ourselves, and can touch our unconscious and link it, to our bodies, the way that she sways back and forth, our personal histories, the fact that she never had a mother who rocked her. Now she is rocking this kind of concept of a child. It's almost as if she's rocking herself, and both being mother and child as she listens to the song. And later in her life, she becomes a caretaker. She becomes one of the best caretakers. And in the story, a caretaker is a clone who takes care of the other clones as they go through the process of, quote unquote, donating their organs, as they are harvested by the system to be basically killed piece by piece as their organs are removed. She takes care of them and kind of tries to improve their life by making them comfortable, by spending time with them so they aren't lonely, and so on and so forth. And so in that way, there's a kind of mothering or nurturing that Kathy is doing for these people as a caretaker that is related to the song Never Let Me Go, and the way that she is cradling this kind of baby or idea of a baby. There's a lot of naivete that all of the characters have. They cope with this in different ways. Like I said, Ruth is very calculated in the way that she approaches other people, the way that she socializes. She's constantly lying. And, psychologically, the reason that we lie to people is in order to assure ourselves of social connections between those people. Like it's not a conscious thing, it's a subconscious thing. Like even little kids will lie, but the reason that we tend to do it is so that we can manipulate those connections with other people to make ourselves feel safe. And so Ruth is seeking out safety. She feels unsafe. She feels unworthy. She has an awareness of a way in which she is a kind of quote unquote fake person. She's not real. They talk about the non-clone people as normal. Ruth is not comfortable with the implication of being abnormal, and she is constantly seeking an idea of a normal life. She has fantasies of working in an office, of stepping outside of the life that clones are forced to lead in their society. And in every social milieu that she lands in, she manipulates everyone around her so that she is the most powerful and therefore the most safe. So in her friendship with Kathy, her and Kathy are best friends. Kathy is very sincere and loyal, but also smart enough to see the ways in which Ruth tells lies, and she backs up Ruth's lies so as to comfort Ruth and like retain her friendship. But Ruth will be cruel to Kathy from time to time. And I guess Kathy is also cruel to Ruth at various times, which feels kind of motivated by a sense of anger and resentment for the times that Ruth was mean to her. But probably the biggest example of this is that Kathy feels an attraction to Tommy, where at first, when they're younger, before puberty, she wants to protect Tommy from, he's just so vulnerable and socially clumsy that he's constantly bullied and getting beaten up. And Kathy is so nurturing, and, like she has all of those proto caretaker qualities to her, even as a little girl, that she wants to take care of Tommy and reaches out to him in that way. And the bond that they form makes Ruth anxious. And so once they come into puberty and they all start to kind of couple up, Ruth immediately makes Tommy her boyfriend and makes Kathy feel ashamed of her own, sexual desires, and makes it really clear to Kathy that Tommy would never be interested in her, that there is no chance of a romantic connection between Kathy and Tommy, and on like that. So it positions Ruth in a way, and all of that's not true. It's all lies, and the point of the lies is to position Ruth, if it's a love triangle, at the top of the triangle, if you will, that she is the most powerful element of the love triangle and therefore the safest in her mind. But because everything that Ruth builds is based on lies, she is the most anxious. She feels the least secure in her, kind of quote unquote position of power. So she, in a way, even if she is the most powerful in any social situation, she's always the one who feels that the most out of control, the most vulnerable to change. And out of the three of them, she's the first one to succumb to the harvesting of her organs, and they call it completes, which is a euphemism for dying. So her organs are totally harvested, and there's like nothing left of Ruth after that. The whole idea of the clones and kind of the social gambit of creating a society that includes this type of innovation seems related to a variation of the trolley problem to me, where it's like, the trolley problem is there's a train that's going down, and it could go down two different tracks. Down one set of tracks, it would hit one person, and down the other set of tracks, it would hit a crowd of people. And then you, for some reason, are at the switchboard, and you could choose for it to go and kill an individual, or you can allow it to go forward and kill many, many people. And so there's a kind of mathematical mentality that is applied, logically to this social question of what do you do, this moral question. And the math of it feels like one person dying is better than a crowd of people. And I think this is directly related to what I was talking about earlier of belletrism versus this kind of functionalism, and the way in which we have chosen as a society to set aside beauty for beauty's sake, art for art's sake, and instead we need to instrumentalize every aspect of our aesthetic culture. There's no reason to read a poem or look at a painting merely for its beauty. Instead, we need to kind of pick it apart intellectually, figure out what it means, the exact way that I'm doing with this podcast right now, ironically, and not talk about, the ways in which, this makes me feel sadness, or it makes me feel connected to the artist, or it inspires me in this way, or it just makes my life better. That beauty has a place in life for its own sake, because life is beautiful and the inside of us as human beings is beautiful. And so to express that and share with each other the beauty of the world and of ourselves has its own, value that doesn't need to be justified in some way. Instead, our society has, put an emphasis on the way in which everything needs to be instrumentalized, everything needs to have function. And so we look at the lives of people in the trolley problem as being a functional instrumentalization of society itself. Like, we are all kind of equal units of society in this mathematical formula. And so the -1 is better than -50, for that reason. One of the variations of the trolley problem is where you have many sick people in a hospital and then some healthy people or people who are less sick in the hospital. And it says, would it be right for the doctors to kind of like, quote unquote, take apart the healthier people and distribute their health into the other much more sick people? So you have somebody with heart disease, they need a heart transplant. Let's just take this person who is in the hospital because they have the flu and take their heart and put it into the heart disease person. And this would kill the flu person, but it would save the heart disease person who would otherwise die. And then you could take their healthy kidneys and give it to someone with cirrhosis, and you could, on and on like that. Kind of instrumentalize and redistribute the health of individuals to save the crowd. And it's exactly the same as the trolley problem, where you sacrifice one person to save the group. And again, it kind of looks at everyone as being like one unit of a social composition, that there's a kind of mathematical logic to it. And that is the world in which these clones exist. And I think it's important that the story never has a perspective outside of the clone perspective. And we get to look at the way in which these are fully human people. They are not in some way like a deficit of human cognition or spiritual reality, or however you want to express what makes us human beings. They are completely human as much as we, the reader, are, and we emotionally connect with them. We relate to them. We've all been through school and we've been bullied, or we have been the bullies at various times. We've all had complicated friendships that, have both included cruelty and kindness in the ways that Kathy and Ruth's friendship does, and on and on and on. There's all these tiny interactions that are exquisitely expressed by Ishiguro throughout the novel that are completely relatable and that allow us to connect to these clones who in their society are considered subhuman and don't have rights. And the justification for them to exist and for this systematic harvesting of their organs is that it's for the best for society. And the teachers explain to them late in the novel, when they are fully adults and they're discussing their circumstances, there's no way that society is going to give up this technology. There's a way in which Hailstrom prepares the children to be exploited for the sake of society. And it feels monstrous to us as readers, I think. And it almost feels cruel for the teachers to teach them how to produce art, how to express themselves, to find beauty in learning, and all of the kind of belletrism of the curriculum at their school. It feels cruel because at the end of the day, they're not going to be allowed the same freedoms as everyone else in their society, and they're going to be killed and exploited for the benefit of people who don't see them as fully human. But there's a way in which, by having us experience this entire story from their perspective, it underlines the way that our actual education system has been turned away from learning about beauty for beauty's sake, and instead the writing needs to be, or any of the humanities, philosophy, all of this stuff needs to be turned away from being for its own sake, being for the pleasure of being human and for the beauty of itself, and turn towards how does this functionally contribute to the advancement of society, towards making money, towards producing, and on like that. In other words, school prepares us to be exploited as adults and to be systematically kind of taken apart until we retire, quote unquote, and then die. And there's no idea or place for beauty in that whole system of education preparing us for adulthood. Because what's the point, right? Is the question that is asked by the people, the governments that are funding the education. Why learn about the beauty of a painting or poem if you're going to grow up and be some kind of worker that doesn't produce beauty? There is no point, according to the kind of mathematics of society. And I think Ishiguro's response to that logic is, what's the point of being alive if you don't include the beauty of life? Then it becomes a drudgery where we have monstrously constructed a society that is a factory of death for the mere reproduction of itself. In other words, like, society becomes some kind of theoretical machine where people are the fuel. And so that is the society that we get to slowly experience. Like, it's paid out to us throughout the novel what is actually happening to these clones, and it is monstrous and surprising and upsetting, but it has a direct mirroring, I think, of the world that we live in, that is built on the exploitation of people and the subtraction of beauty from our lives in a very deliberate way, so as to prop up the reproduction of our society and the kind of like growth of production or capital or wealth or whatever you want to call it. So the book is, like, I use the word exquisite. I think it's exquisitely expressive of the way that it feels to grow up and to fall in love and the meaning of those things. And also the tension that we have with the truth and with the society and our own mortality, the way that we give meaning to life, the place that art has in all of that. And it doesn't come to any hard and fast conclusions. It's not the kind of story, like the Hunger Games or something, where they're like, here's this dystopian regime And then the political conscience of the book demands that the structure be torn down and that justice be served and then a better world constructed in its wake. Instead, it's very pessimistic about the possibility of any of that. And I think that's important because it underlines the way in which Ishiguro is claiming, or the story is claiming, that beauty for beauty's sake matters no matter what society is like. It's always mattered. There were cavemen, painting on walls when there were no governments. And there are still people writing poetry and making paintings today because this is something that people need. Beauty is a necessity in our lives. It's not the optional element of a society. It's what human beings are, I think is the claim of the novel. And so to put it in a society where there is no hope or exploration of changing things is not about a pessimism that is political or societal. Instead, it stands in contrast to the internal personal experience of us as individuals. And so it subtracts, this is a weird word to use, the mathematic logic of the trolley problem and focuses on the individual who will be sacrificed in the trolley problem, in other words. It brings forward the humanity of that one personal sacrifice. Kathy is a person in every way. She falls in love. She wants to have friendship. She wants to have personal dignity. She wants to take care of other people. She cares about beauty. On and on and on. She is a person. She is not one social unit in a mathematical equation that adds up to a society, in other words. And so the book is about that. And I don't think if the book was about dismantling the dystopian society, that is just another regime of the way in which every one of us composes one, a plus one of a social component. We were just reorganizing the social order in order to kind of benefit the total happiness of the group, if you will. It just becomes a different kind of math that obscures the way in which the human experience is not about flourishing or happiness or whatever. It's about existence itself and our relationship to beauty. So yeah, Never Let Me Go. Amazing, amazing novel. Always impressed whenever I come back to it. Just the incredible control and lightness of touch that Ishiguro has in every sentence of the book. It's just, like I said, exquisite. Just an amazing, amazing book.